consenting to being part of the webcast. Also, a recording of this webcast is going to be available on the NARUC website within a few days at naruc.org/lab, and then from there you would just click on past meetings to find the recording. And then I also want to mention that this webcast is being done as part of an award that NARUC received from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and so we'd like to thank them for their continued support. So as for the format of today's webinar, we plan to have everyone unmuted, which I haven't done yet, but I'm going to do momentarily. And the reason for this is that our intent is to have this be more of an interactive discussion. We would like to hear about your state experiences. And so to encourage this kind of participation, I'll have everyone unmuted. And if you do happen to have background noise, just we ask that you mute your own phone line. And then to ensure that we're able to hear you, please be sure that you enter the audio pin that appeared under the telephone number that you used to dial in with. So throughout the presentation, we're encouraging you to ask questions and make comments in order to help this be more of an interactive dialogue. And now I'll introduce our presenter for today, who's Hannah Polikov. Hannah is the director of the PUC program at Advanced Energy Economy, where she works to promote greater understanding of advanced energy as well as its economic potential. Prior to joining AEE, Hannah served as the Senior Policy Advisor to the Director of the Maryland Energy Administration, where she designed and implemented the Governor's $25 million Green Schools Initiative. Before that, Hannah was the Senior Legislative Assistant for the Energy and Commerce Issues for Congresswoman Jane Harman, and an associate at Smith Anderson Law Firm, where she helped to found the firm's renewable energy practice. And then lastly, she received both her BA and JD with honors from Duke University. And with that, I will turn things over to you, Hannah.
Thank you very much.
Hannah, are you there still? Hold on, Hannah. Hannah, sorry, could you start over again? The noise cut out for a little bit.
Yeah, no problem. So hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar, Grid Modernization, What You Can Teach to and Learn from Your Neighbors. Many thanks to Sharon and to NARUC for making today's webinar possible. As Sharon said, please feel free to jump in at any time with questions or anything you'd like to add. We'd like to make this as interactive as possible. So to dive right in. Oh. There we go. Come on, slides. There we go. Okay, to dive right in. This slide shows how grid modernization dockets have been proliferating across the country over the past several years. The map on the left shows the occurrence of dockets mentioning the term grid modernization for the one-year period from September 1st, 2012 to September 1st, 2013. It's a heat map where light green indicates 1 or 2 dockets in a state, and dark green or more green indicates even more dockets. So the bottom line is that there's a lot of white states on this map on the left where there was no activity at all, at least as of 4 years ago. Now fast forward to today, so 4 years later, with the graph on the right, and you can see that there's been more than a 10-fold uptick in the number of dockets across the country mentioning grid modernization. And today, 42 states plus DC have some sort of active grid mod docket going. In other words, grid modernization has indeed come to a neighborhood near you. So grid modernization is a very broad term. It covers many, many topics, but for the purposes of today's webinar, I've selected 6 of these topics to dive into, and I've listed them out here. So first we'll cover advanced metering, then distribution system planning, then access to data, then optimizing utility expenditures, then performance-based regulation, and then we'll end on rate design. And for each of these topics, what I'm going to do is give you an overview of the issue and then provide some of my favorite state examples. I'm hoping you leave this webinar having not just learned something new about these issues, but also knowing which states to reach out to learn more about their specific activities, so that if you want to dive deeper, you have the knowledge of how to do that. So first up, we've got advanced metering infrastructure. So this is a chart with the most recent data from EIA, which was released in November of last year, and it has annual data through 2015. So it's definitely a little bit dated, but what you can see is that even as of 20 months ago, more than half of homes in the US already had AMI, and that number has only continued to increase. A question I hear a lot from commissions is, so we made this big AMI investment. How do I maximize that investment now? A lot of utilities are using AMI to avoid manual meter reading, and that's great. That's a great part of the business case, but there really is so much more that can be done with AMI, particularly when it comes to enabling other technologies and services, such as time-varying rates. One of my favorite examples of that comes from my home state of Maryland, which brings us to our first state example. So back in 2012 in Maryland, Baltimore Gas and Electric, or BGE for short, started rolling out smart meters. And in concert with that rollout, they started their peak time rebate program. And they made that the default rate for all customers with an installed smart meter. Now, a peak time rebate is a type of time varying rate. And the way it works is that a customer can earn money if they reduce their energy use at a certain time when the grid is under strain, like in the middle of a very hot day in the summer when everyone is blasting their air conditioning at the same time. The way that BGE's program works is that the day before what's predicted to be a really hot summer day, BGE will notify their customers by phone or email or text and say, hey, if you reduce your usage tomorrow between the hours of 1 p.m. and 7 p.m., you'll get a bill credit. You'll make money. And the bill credit is about $1.25 per kilowatt hour. So then people reduce their energy. BGE aggregates all of that reduction. They turn around and they actually bid it into PJM as demand response, and then they earn money from the PJM market that they can use to pay back their customers. So I'm personally a customer who gets these notices, and I love it. The average bill credit during a peak event is just shy of $7, which I realize isn't much, but I'll tell you, as a customer, it's actually kind of fun to play the game each time that when these events come of oh, can I save even more than I did last time? And at the end of the day, in the aggregate, they have more than 1 million customers who are regularly participating in these events, and that really adds up. So the latest stats that I've seen are that as of 2016, the program had saved consumers in BGE's capacity zone $162 million in capacity charges and another $7 million in avoided transmission and distribution infrastructure costs. And non-BGE customers in adjacent zones also benefited. They actually saw an additional $126 million savings due to the program, illustrating how a program like this can benefit people, not just participants, but in the broader system, because you're reducing demand on the system as a whole. So this peak time rebate program made up 50% of the total benefits presented in BGE's AMI business case, which is quite significant, and it was equivalent to $1.2 billion over the 15-year expected life of the AMI component. Some very impressive numbers, and as I mentioned, certainly some happy customers as well. So any questions about AMI in general, or the Maryland example in particular, or if anyone from Maryland wants to jump in to add anything, let me just pause here for questions and any additional comments. Okay. Then I will keep moving to our second topic. So our second topic is distribution system planning, or how your utilities are planning for investments in the distribution grid. So all utilities do distribution system planning. That in and of itself is not new. They look at their system, they make certain judgments about how much load is going to grow, and what on their system might break or might need to be upgraded. And then they package those assumptions into a request to their regulators to say, please approve this many millions or tens of millions of dollars of distribution investments. What is new is that PUCs and the utilities in states like the ones on the map here, so Hawaii, California, Minnesota, Michigan, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, they're all starting to change the way that distribution system planning is done in their states to make it more forward-looking and more cognizant of new technologies and new opportunities and challenges facing the distribution system. So in other words, at a time of so much change in the electricity system due to new technologies and changing customer preferences and many other factors, and with more than $25 billion each year being spent by utilities on distribution system investments, these states are taking a proactive approach to make sure that they're approving the right investments and that they don't end up down the line with stranded costs. So Minnesota is a really great example of this. So the next few slides that I'm actually going to present come directly from a presentation that Minnesota PUC Chairwoman Nancy Lang did on a webinar with us a few weeks ago. And she's kindly agreed to let me use these few slides again here. So Minnesota started off their distribution system planning process recently with a few guiding questions. They said, are we planning for and investing in the distribution system that we will need in the future? Are the planning processes aligned to ensure future reliability, efficient use of resources, to maximize customer benefits, and to allow the successful implementation of public policy? And then finally, what commission actions, what can we as a commission do to support improved alignment of planning for and investment in the distribution system? So with those three guiding questions in mind, this past April, Minnesota issued a really fantastic, comprehensive three-part questionnaire to their utilities and stakeholders, gathering data first to better understand how their utilities currently do distribution system planning and what they're currently planning to invest in, and then also gathering input from both the utilities and other stakeholders on how best to augment that planning. So you can see from the examples in the third circle with the little question marks about some of the ideas of what that augmentation might look like. So things like scenario planning, hosting capacity investments, et cetera. And certainly there's a much broader list beyond that as well that's under consideration. I've given a link to the questionnaire in the slides, and I highly recommend it as a really nice template for other states who are starting to think about doing a deeper dive into distribution system planning and are trying to think through, where and really how to start. So before I move to the next topic, I just wanted to share these lessons learned on distribution system planning from Chairwoman Lang. So first lesson learned is the importance of the commission really, as a first step, understanding the status quo. So understanding what does the utility system in their state look like today, and what are the utilities already planning to invest in, getting that strong underpinning. Second, the commission then had to become familiar with advanced energy technologies and various distributed energy resources, or DERs for short, so that they knew what new options were out there and what they were capable of doing. Third, the commission then had to build a framework for guiding PUC actions and engaging stakeholders in this new process. Fourth, the commission found that it was important to get a diversity of perspectives from different stakeholders to inform their work. Fifth, the commission sought outside expertise from DOE, from the national labs, and from many others to evaluate what they were learning and what they were missing, to make sure that they were being quite comprehensive and checking, doing everything as best as possible. And then finally, they learned that distribution system planning is really going to evolve and iterate over time. So they were saying, it's helpful to think about, what are your near-term objectives, your mid-term objectives, your long-term objectives as you're doing these plans. So, just as an example, and this is now my own words, a near-term objective could be increasing reliability for your state, whereas a longer-term objective could be coordinating distribution system planning with integrated resource planning and transmission planning. So really, bringing all of your different planning processes together and creating a process where you could iterate over time to bring more and more of those things together. So on that note, let me pause there for any questions about distribution system planning in general or the Minnesota example in particular before I move on to my next topic. Any questions there, anything that folks would like to jump in with? All right, then I will keep us moving to our next topic. Okay, so circling back to the AMI topic that we started with, one of the big benefits of AMI is that it collects data, both customer data and system data. And all kinds of interesting and valuable things can be done with that data if it can be properly and fully utilized. So how do we make that happen? First, I'm going to talk about customer data, and then I'll move on to system data. So starting with customer data. So our general belief is that data belongs to the customer. The customer paid for the AMI that collected the data. The customer generates the data. It's theirs, and they should really be able to do with it what they want. So adopting a standardized data exchange such as DOE's Green Button Connect is a really great scalable way to provide individual customer data to customers and to customer authorized third parties. This map shows where utilities have at least committed to adopting Green Button Connect. I realize, again, this map is a bit dated, and we actually have a request in to get a more updated version. But in general, you can see that you probably have someone in your region who's at least committed to adopting Green Button Connect. The light green is committed, the dark green is actually implemented, and this is all as of January 2015. So for my neighbor example, I'm going to use California, which has really been at the forefront of this issue for almost a decade. You can see here on this map that they were the first state to actually implement Green Button Connect. And I want to make an important point here. There are really two elements needed to get access to customer data right. One element is the infrastructure, so having a platform like Green Button Connect where customer data can be logged and accessed. But the second element is getting the authorization process right. And what I mean by that is that you can adopt Green Button Connect and you can have this great platform where the data lives, but if you then require a very onerous, say 15-step authorization process involving like a fax machine and just lots of hoops for folks to jump through before they actually can access the data on the platform, you've got a big problem. And that's basically what happened in California. So you can see back in 2011, California issued their first order requiring the IOUs to make certain information available to customers and third parties. And the utilities did go ahead and implement the Green Button Connect platform, but they were finding that the authorization process to get to that data was so onerous that few people were actually using it. So in 2016 and 2017, they issued new rules to streamline the authorization process. And now there's a really simple automated click-through authorization process to get and share the data on the Green Button Connect. So just wanted to, and I've shared here with folks the different dockets that all that information is in if folks want to dive deeper. So we just talked about access to customer data, and now I want to shift to talk about access to system data. So the idea here is that if you can make information available to third parties on things like circuit level distributed generation hosting capacity, or locations on the grid with capacity constraints or power quality problems, and you can help PBR providers. Oh, we're getting somebody can put themselves on mute. Let me see if I can. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you for whoever just helped do that. Much appreciated. Okay, so I was starting to say. So if you can help DER providers determine the best places to locate DER on the grid and to respond to system needs with cost-effective DER solutions, you've really helped the grid and all the different technologies work much better together. So for example, you could geo-target customers in a load pocket for energy efficiency or energy storage, so you could relieve that pocket and avoid more expensive traditional infrastructure upgrades. The neighbor example I'll use here is Hawaii, but just so that folks know, California, New York, and DC are all starting to do this too. Here's a map that Hawaiian Electric produced on the Big Island in Hawaii that indicates where the best places are to add more DG. So you can sort of think of it like a traffic light. The green means go ahead and build. There's plenty of hosting capacity for more DG on the circuits here. Red means stop. We're almost completely out of hosting capacity. And then orange is somewhere in between. So As you can see here, Hawaii is going all the way down to the street level to show the available hosting capacity left on each circuit. It's pretty amazing to see it in this kind of granularity. And I just wanted to mention on a related note here at the bottom of this page, if you're interested in these sorts of hosting capacity maps and an interconnection of DR more broadly, a great new proceeding to follow is the recently opened California docket R1707007, which I give you the site to here. It's a rulemaking to consider streamlining interconnection of distributed energy resources and improvements to Rule 21. So that's obviously a mouthful, but basically Rule 21 in California is the tariff that describes the interconnection process for distributed resources. It's been around since 1982, so 35 years old, and it's been repeatedly updated over the years to keep it fresh. And so what we're seeing now in California is that they're updating the tariff once again to take into account new things like these new maps and other related things to help further streamline the interconnection process. So let me pause here before I move on to our next topic. Any questions about customer data access or system data access or the California or Hawaii examples that I gave, or if anyone from Hawaii or California wants to add anything, let me just pause and give folks that opportunity. Okay, great, then I will keep us moving. All right, so next topic is optimizing utility expenditures. So utilities are spending in the neighborhood of $100 billion each year on capital investments, as you can see from this chart here. And as you can also see from the chart, there's been a general upward trend. So with all of that money on the table, how can PUCs make sure that those dollars are being optimized? Throughout the economy, we're seeing a trend towards companies getting more and more efficient with their capital and finding that it often makes more sense to obtain services provided by third parties rather than investing in physical assets that they own and manage themselves. So for example, think about Uber leveraging the cars that people already own instead of investing in their own fleet, or think about Airbnb leveraging that extra bedroom in your house instead of building their own hotels. So you can apply those same ideas to the utility industry. And you could imagine, for example, utilities leveraging rooftop solar on their customers' roofs instead of building their own power plant and aggregating that into what's called a virtual power plant. Or you could imagine utilities leveraging customers' willingness to reduce their own demand on a hot day, like what we saw earlier in the Maryland peak time rebate program example. And that would alleviate the need to build a new peaker plant. So with this new technology, all these things are possible, but this trend towards efficiency in services has actually been really slow to take hold in the utility industry. And that's because it comes into conflict with the prevailing utility business model known as the cost of service business model. So under that traditional business model, utilities make money by building big capital investments, so power plants, poles, wires, et cetera, and then they earn a rate of return on those investments. So since capital investments are the main driver of utility profits, services that can improve the utilization of capital investments or defer them altogether have the effect of reducing utility opportunities for profit. So this can bias utilities away from service-based alternatives that may be more cost-effective for their customers. So how can you address that bias for large capital investments and get utilities to choose the best, most efficient, and cost-effective option, whether they own it or not? A number of PUCs are exploring that question, and I'll use New York as my example. So first, what New York is doing is they're allowing utilities to capitalize the cost of non-wires alternatives and allowing utilities to share in the cost savings between that non-wires alternative option and what it would have cost to build a traditional solution. So what this does is it encourages utilities to go out and find the best, most cost-effective solution to a given problem, whether that's the traditional solution or the new non-wires alternative solution. So a good example of this in New York is the Brooklyn Queens Demand-Side Management Program, or BQDM for short, where Con Ed, the utility there, was about used non-wireless alternatives to defer a $1.2 billion system upgrade. And they were able to do this with just $200 million of investments in DERs like demand response and energy storage. So really quite an impressive example. So second, and on a related note, New York has also recognized that utilities can capitalize prepaid software as a service contracts. And what this does is it signals to utilities, instead of building your own costly on-site computer hardware and software that may be obsolete in a few years anyway, instead you should go contract for the more cost-effective cloud service where the risk of obsolescence is on the third party, and you can get the kind of computing power and expertise that you need to start being able to really take advantage of all of those DERs on your system. So New York actually didn't issue any sort of specific order to allow this sort of capitalization. They just noted as part of a broader order that they were putting out that utilities already have this authority under existing general utility accounting rules that sort of apply across the country and really nothing specific to New York. And I've given the citations there to both of those orders if folks want to read further. So any questions about this topic of optimizing utility expenditures or the New York example before I move on, or if anyone from New York wants to add anything, just want to pause and give folks that opportunity. Okay, so I'll keep us moving. So next we turn to a related topic, and that a related topic that also gets to the utility business model, and that's performance-based regulation, or PBR for short. So the best way I've heard this topic explained is that for the last century, under the traditional cost of service business model, regulators have asked, are we getting what we paid for? Are the utilities doing what they said they would do when we approved their budget? With PBR, the question changes to, are we getting what we want? Are the utilities not just building more and more, but are they actually helping us achieve our state objectives, whatever those objectives may be, whether they're saving people money or improving reliability or making the grid cleaner, whatever the state objective may be. So while the cost of service business model incentivizes utilities to build more and more capital projects that they own, and the mechanisms we just talked about help utilities to better take advantage of services and new technology to optimize their expenditures, PBR goes even a step further by saying we're going to incentivize utilities to hit certain specific outcomes and potentially penalize them for underperforming on those different metrics. As you can see from this map, several states are exploring PBR, and the neighbor that I'll highlight here is Michigan, which is doing a comprehensive study on PBR that will wrap up early next year, and then it'll be submitted to the governor and the legislature. So as you can see, so here is a quick timeline of the PBR process in Michigan. They've been great about posting presentations and resources, so you can follow along with how they're exploring this topic and what they're learning along the way. The next step is that they'll be distributing a strawman report for stakeholders for review in November, so you can keep an eye out for that. And at the bottom of the slide, I've given a link to the Michigan website where you can find more information, along with the link to one of the resources they cite, which is a report that we at AEE Institute prepared for the Pennsylvania PUC, laying out suggested performance categories and metrics. So here is a table from that Pennsylvania report, and it provides just a nice summary from the report. So you can see that given that state's particular interests, we recommended focusing on the performance categories of customer engagement, operational efficiency and reliability, environmental sustainability, and market innovation. And then we suggested a number of performance metrics across those categories. I wanted to provide this to folks to just give a sense of the types of state objectives you can further with PBR and how. So I'm going to pause here for any questions about PBR in general, or the Michigan example I provided, or this table here, or if folks from Michigan or Pennsylvania want to add anything, I just wanted to create that opportunity for folks. So let me open it up. Okay. All right, so this brings us to the last topic that I wanted to cover here in my formal remarks, and that is rate design. So it's a very hot topic these days, and PUCs are trying to figure out how to equitably allocate costs, how to properly value the benefits that DER provides, and also how to allow utilities to fairly recover the revenue they need to maintain their systems. So one idea that's been getting more and more traction is time-varying rates, or TVR for short, which prices electricity higher when demand on the system is higher, thereby better aligning rates with cost causation. So as you can see from this chart, there are a lot of states already implementing TVR in one of its various forms. This chart is also dated, the EIA data only coming out in November. But as you can see, already through 2015, there was widespread deployment of time-varying rates, and you'd expect that number to be even higher today. So TVR can come in many different flavors. In Maryland, as we mentioned earlier, they do those peak time rebates. In Illinois, they offer residential customers real-time prices, which means that customers experience the same fluctuations in rates as they occur in the wholesale markets. I have a colleague that actually is taking advantage of those real-time prices and absolutely loves it. In Arizona and in many other places, they offer time of use rates, which say that during certain defined peak and off-peak times, the price per kilowatt hour will be X or Y, and folks can take advantage of that as well. So how TVR is implemented is really important. Customers have to have the knowledge and ability to react to the price signals. That means they'll need to have some sort of smart meters to measure their usage at different times, and they'll need to be educated about how the TVR works. To use the Maryland Peak Time Rebate Program, again, as an example, they did a mass market educational campaign up front, and then they do personalized pre and post event communication to get people to act. And tying this back to the customer data access issue we discussed earlier, it's also helpful to allow customers to share their data with third parties who can help them take advantage of TVR by automatically managing their energy use for them. So for my state example here, I'm going to turn to Oklahoma. So this chart shows the 4 flavors of TVR, of time-varying rates that are out there. So there's time of use, there's critical peak pricing, there's peak time rebates, and there's real-time pricing. I already discussed sort of what each of them, what a lot of them were, so I won't repeat that here. But what I wanted to describe is that for the Oklahoma Gas and Electric program, which started back in 2011 and is called Smart Hours, they use the first 2 types of rates. So they use time of use and they use critical peak pricing. The time of use element in this program is that there's an on-peak rate from 2 to 7 p.m. every day, and then there's a lower off-peak rate at other times. The critical peak pricing element is that a few days each year, the on-peak price gets very high. So you can sort of think of it as the inverse of the peak time rebate program for Maryland, where their customers are effectively paid for reducing their demand on those high usage days. With a critical peak price, you're sort of incentivized to use less because you're charged extra if you do use energy at those times. So this program in Oklahoma is opt-in, which means you only have to do it if you want to. You're not forced into it. Through 2015, the program had about 120,000 customers who chose to opt in, and it was able to cut the utilities peak by 150 megawatts, or about 2%, which is actually pretty significant. The program has a goal of enrolling over 20% of all of Oklahoma Gas and Electric's residential customers, with the final objective of delaying the building of a fossil fuel generation plant. So average savings are $150 to $200 per customer per year. And Oklahoma Gas and Electric provides what they call a best bill guarantee, which basically ensures customers won't pay more for the first 12 months they're on the Smart Hours program than they would have paid on their standard flat rate. And the way they do that is that they basically do what's called a shadow bill. So they're billing you one way, but they're keeping track of what your bill would have been on the other program. And if they find at the end of the 12 months that you did pay more, then they'll basically credit you for the difference. And the idea here is that they want to provide customers with this no-risk option to try the new programs and help them take the time to actually adjust their electricity usage away from those peak hours, so that they can help the system overall and cut the demand and help meet those needs for reduced peak. So Any questions about this last rate design topic, the Oklahoma example, or any of the other 6 topics that I've covered so far?
Yeah, this is Liz Grevaru at the New York Department of Public Service. I just got a little confused.
Yeah.
Hi, with that last description. You were talking about customers opting into the critical peak pricing rate. Is that what you were talking about? Or were you talking about customers? Okay, so that's the number of customers who are. That was the customers who are opting to get charged more for use during a peak demand event, right?
Right. So basically, it's the whole program. So then the program has 2 components. So it's got both that regular time of use component on. So a normal day, you're going to have an on-peak period and an off-peak period, and there's some sort of differential between those two times. But then there's also the critical peak pricing element, which means that for a few days a year, then that on-peak price is particularly high, and you're notified in advance when that's going to happen, so that you can adjust your usage accordingly. But basically, if you opt into that whole program with all of those components, then you're in the program, and then you're subject to all of it. And overall, what they're finding is that people who have chosen to opt into the program and to take advantage of both that time of use and that critical peak pricing element, that they're saving an average of $150 to $200 per year off of what their base bill would have been had they stayed on their standard rate.
Okay, but is anybody in the peak time rebate or the real-time pricing program?
So that's not offered. So this is
okay.
Purely what their program is. So
Okay.
The other examples I was giving were from other states. So for example, I was saying Illinois has a real-time pricing program that they're implementing there, which is also opt-in, and then Maryland has the peak time rebate program, which is actually the default rate. So it's you can sort of think of it as an opt-out, but there's really no reason to opt out, because you're effectively opting out by not choosing to modify your behavior and not getting the benefit of the incentive on the day. So it from a peak time rebate program, whether it's opt-in or opt-out, is sort of less relevant than say for like a critical peak pricing program.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions or anything else that folks would like to add?
Hi, Hannah. This is Steve Powers, New York PSC.
Hi.
Hi. I'm wondering, have any other states adopted that guarantee that customers won't be charged more?
So that's a good question. I know that it is a standard idea out there, and the whole concept of the shadow bill is one of sort of thought of as one of the best practices. But in terms of specifically which states have adopted it, I don't know offhand. But what I can do is I can do some quick research to generate that list, and then I can share it with Sharon, who can then share it with all of you if that would work.
That'd be great.
Absolutely. Okay. Any other questions or anything else that folks would like to add?
Hey, Hannah, this is Sharon. Some folks are having some trouble with the audio. Pat Hudson had a comment about PBR in Michigan, and so
sure.
I'll read that. He entered it into the questions function. He said that.
Thank you.
Sure. He said an important thing to note with PBR is that there are a variety of mechanisms that might be utilized, ranging from the UK's RIIO model. I'm not sure if I said that correctly.
RIA model? Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep, the RIA model. Yep.
States that utilize multi-year rate making and other variations as well. Instead of entirely replacing cost of service principles, it might be that variations of PBR still utilize cost of service, but emphasize shifts to show how those investments perform. That was Pat Hudson's comment. There are a couple other questions that I got as well through the questions feature, but I'll wait till the end because those slides have.
Absolutely.
Hey,
Absolutely.
Hannah,
thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
I can respond to that a little bit as well.
Yeah,
this is Benjamin. So this is Benjamin Stafford of Advanced Energy Economy Institute as well. And Pat's comment is exactly correct. There is a lot of variation in PBR in whether PBR, like in the UK example that he cites, which is an entire regulatory system that is sort of an umbrella philosophy of regulation, or there may be mechanisms that are performance-based, for instance, rate-making examples like what they're pursuing in Pennsylvania. So there are a wide ranges of what PBR may mean and may not mean, and some of that may develop as a result of the statutory authority that a state commission has or does not have. And it just also may be the strategy of where utilities are and how we as an industry can move grid modernization forward.
Thanks, Benjamin. Much appreciated. Any other questions or thoughts that folks want to share? I'm quickly just going through some of the questions I'm seeing in the question box. So I see that there's a question from Jeremy regarding the BGE peak pricing program. How does BGE quantify each customer's reduced usage? What's the baseline against which they compare observed usage? So I can answer that at a pretty high level, but if anybody from Maryland is on the line who can answer that in more detail.
From Puerto Rico,
so my understanding
is on the West radar system, so it extends out to about here. We'll lose the eye soon, but we're still seeing that eye as it moves.
I think we're getting somebody's audio.
Rain bands,
okay.
But Irma continuing to press off.
Can we mute that? Okay, so to answer that question, like I said, I can answer it kind of at a high level based on my understanding. So my understanding is that basically, so because there's smart meter deployment from all the customers who are using this, the smart meter data over the course of the year is analyzed and a baseline is created, and it's sort of a complicated algorithm that they use based on what they're sort of seeing as your general usage pattern. I mean, I can get more details about that, but I'll just sort of leave it at that kind of high level. And then basically what they do is that during that period, they basically take the difference between what your baseline was, so sort of what they would have expected you to do normally based on that history of your usage, and then they take that difference, and that's what they use to calculate what your savings were, so how many kilowatt hours you actually saved. But if folks are looking for that, Jeremy, if you're looking for that more granular answer, I can get that for you. I know I've seen it before, and it's fairly complicated what they do. Is anyone from Maryland on who can give a more detailed answer?
Oops. Sorry.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Hannah, can you hear me?
Oh.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Hear you
now. This is John Cuskar from Maryland. Sorry, I've had trouble connecting. I think your explanation at a high level of how that baseline usage is calculated is correct. This was a highly litigated question in the rate cases that looked at recovery of costs for AMI as essentially how that baseline was calculated. So there's plenty of record evidence for those of you who are interested in really diving into the details. But at a high level, you got it exactly correct. There's a baseline looking at the past history, and then your reduction in usage from that baseline is how the rebate is calculated.
Great. And John, if you could maybe just shoot me and Sharon the link to, or just the docket number for what docket that would have been captured in. I don't know if it was in one of the Empower dockets or presumably the AMI docket. I mean, if there's like a particular order that came out or particular documents to refer folks to, then we can share that information with the folks on the call.
I will do that. Thank you.
Much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments on any of the 6 topics? Okay. All right, then I'm just going to mention a few things to round out the webinar. Here we go. So one thing is I want to point everyone to a great resource that's completely free for folks from PUCs to use, and that's AEE's Power Suite search engine, which I've taken a few screenshots of here. It's a one-stop search engine for finding and tracking PUC dockets from across the country. We've got all 50 states covered, plus DC, plus FERC for that matter. And you can see here how I actually used the search engine to create that those grid mod docket maps that I used at the beginning of the presentation. So when you run a search, it gives you a nice heat map, and then it actually gives you all of the hits. So in this case, I got the hits of all the hundreds of dockets across the country that are mentioned in grid mod today. And you can see on the right, I've taken a screenshot of some of those search results that came back. And if I wanted to dig into any of those dockets further, I could basically just click on any of those titles, and that would bring me right into the docket. And I could, again, search through all the filings. So I could say, hey, just find me the orders, and then I could read through the orders, and I could search for certain things. So it makes docket searching a lot easier. So I know a large number of PUCs, and many of the folks on the call today are already using this tool. I've done quite a few demos for PUCs on how to make the most of it. So if you or your colleagues would like a demo like that, please just feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to set one up. So that pretty much concludes our webinar. Next week, Advanced Energy Economy, an affiliate of AEE Institute, is going to be releasing issue briefs on many of the topics that I've covered today. So if folks are interested in learning more, keep an eye out for those. Again, thank you to NARUC for the opportunity to spend this hour with all of you. Thank you to the folks who jumped in with questions and comments, much appreciated. And thank you to all of you for making the time for today's webinar. I provided my contact information here. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any additional questions or want to explore any of these issues further. I'm happy to do so. So thank you all again for your time. And if folks want to stay on and ask any more questions, I'll hang on for the next few minutes. But otherwise, thank you all for your time today. And these slides, as Sharon mentioned at the beginning, will be available on NARUC's website, so you guys can go back through them at your leisure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. That was a great overview of an array of various ways that states are approaching grid modernization to meet their unique needs. It was very insightful, and if anyone has further questions, feel free to just say them aloud or type them into the questions function box, and we'll hang on here for a while longer. Okay, I'm not getting any more questions, so I guess we can go ahead and conclude the webinar. So thank you all for joining, and I hope you all have a great rest of the afternoon.